I need to tell you something that took me 26 years to say out loud. My name is not bad luck. My name is Nora. But for the first 2 decades of my life, nobody in my family actually called me that. They called me the problem. They called me the reason. My uncle called me Raven, like the bird that brings death. My own mother would introduce me to her friends and say, "This is my younger one. The complicated one." She'd smile when she said it, like it was a funny quirk about me. Like I was born with a strange birthmark or an odd laugh. I was not born with a curse. I was born into a family that needed one. Here's what they never told anyone outside the house. My father made a terrible business decision 6 weeks before I was born. He partnered with his brother on a restaurant that failed spectacularly within a year. He lost $40,000. His marriage nearly collapsed. His relationship with his brother turned poisonous. And then I arrived 6 weeks later, this tiny inconvenient baby, and it was so much easier to blame me than to look at themselves. That's the thing about scapegoating that nobody explains. It's not random cruelty. It's deliberate architecture. Families build it carefully over years because they need somewhere to put the shame. And once that structure is in place, it holds everything up. Remove the scapegoat and the whole story of who they are comes crashing down. I was the load-bearing wall they built their dysfunction on. And 3 months ago, after 6 years of silence, my father called me from a hospital waiting room and said 7 words that cracked something open inside me permanently. "We need you to fix this, Nora." Not hello. Not I'm sorry. Not I've missed you. Just fix this. I'm going to tell you everything. Let me paint you the picture of growing up in the Voss household. My sister Petra was born 4 years before me, and she was everything my parents wanted to be. Confident, loud, magnetic. She got the lead in every school play. She charmed every teacher. When she walked into a room, my father's chest puffed up visibly. My mother would reach over and squeeze his arm like, "Look what we made." Then I came along and I was quiet. I read too much. I asked too many questions. I cried at commercials for animal shelters. I was small and strange and deeply uninterested in performing for company. The narrative started small. My dad lost the restaurant money and blamed his stress on pregnancy. My mom had a miscarriage the year after I was born and told anyone who would listen that she'd never fully recovered after Nora. A pipe burst in our basement when I was 3. The family dog bit a neighbor kid when I was 5 and had to be given away. Each event got added to a mental list. An unofficial accounting of damage. By the time I was 7, I understood that I was the explanation for everything that went wrong. Not because anyone sat me down and told me directly, but because of the looks, the size, the way my father would say of course in a flat voice whenever something broke or failed or disappointed him, and then turn and look at me. My sister learned the language fluently. She started calling me Raven when I was 8 and my parents laughed, so it stuck. At school I was just Nora. At home I was the omen, the dark cloud, the reason we couldn't have nice things. I spent years trying to disprove the theory. I got perfect grades. I did chores without being asked. I stayed quiet at family dinners so I couldn't accidentally ruin anything with my presence. I was the most careful, most invisible, most exhausting version of a child trying to earn the right to exist in her own house. Nothing I did changed the equation. The moment I remember most clearly was the summer I turned 12. My father got passed over for a promotion at the manufacturing company where he'd worked for 9 years. He came home that Friday evening, sat down at the kitchen table, and didn't speak for 20 minutes. My mother put a plate of food in front of him. Petra kept talking about something that happened at volleyball practice. I sat perfectly still, barely breathing, the way I'd learned to do when his mood was like weather about to turn. He finally looked up and said, "You know what it is? It's this house. There's something wrong with the energy in this house." My mother nodded. Petra went quiet. He looked at me. He didn't say my name. He didn't point. He just looked the way you look at a stain you've been meaning to clean up. I went to my room and sat on the floor next to my bed and thought about whether I could leave. I was 12. I had no money and nowhere to go, so instead I made a different plan. I would become so useful that they couldn't possibly keep blaming me. I would stop being a drain and become an asset. I started babysitting neighborhood kids for $8 an hour when I was 13. I gave my parents half my earnings without being asked. My mother took it without commenting. My father bought beer with it on weekends. Nobody said thank you. Nobody said anything at all. But I kept going because the alternative was accepting that there was nothing I could do, and I wasn't ready to believe that yet. Petra, meanwhile, got a car for her 16th birthday. Used but still. A real car with a bow on it in the driveway. I watched from my bedroom window when they surprised her and I remember thinking, that's who they are. And this, standing at the window alone, is who I am to them. I decided right then that I was going to leave the moment I legally could. I started planning my exit at 15 with the same precision I applied to everything else in my life. I opened a savings account at the bank 3 blocks from school, the one my parents didn't use, and I deposited every dollar I earned babysitting. I researched scholarships obsessively. I checked out library books about college applications, and read them hidden inside textbook covers at home because I didn't want anyone asking questions. My grades were the best in my class. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Aldridge, called me into her office in junior year and asked why I looked so tired. I told her I was working a lot. She asked where my parents were in the college process and I said they were supportive, which was the most efficient lie I knew how to tell. She looked at me the way adults sometimes did, like they could see something I was trying to cover, and she printed out a list of full-ride scholarship opportunities and slid it across her desk without saying anything else. I applied to 11 schools. I told no one. Petra was in her second year at a local community college by then, still living at home, still being driven places by my mother, still celebrated at every Sunday dinner for existing in the general vicinity of higher education. My parents threw a party when she got into community college. They invited the neighbors. My aunt made a cake. When I got my first acceptance letter, a state university 4 hours away with a merit scholarship that covered 80% of tuition, I sat in the school parking lot in Mrs. Aldridge's car because she'd driven me to the post office to pick it up and read it with the same flat, controlled expression I'd perfected over 15 years. Mrs. Aldridge asked if I was happy. I told her I was leaving. She patted my hand and said, "Good." I told my parents about the scholarship on a Tuesday night in March. I picked Tuesday specifically. Not a weekend when they were more likely to be drinking. Not a Monday, when my father came home from work already defeated. Tuesday felt neutral, survivable. My father was watching TV. My mother was folding laundry. Petra wasn't home. I stood in the living room doorway and said I'd been accepted to Harwick University with a merit scholarship and I was going in September. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. My father muted the TV. My mother set down the shirt she was folding. They looked at each other first before looking at me, which told me everything about the conversation that was coming. My mother asked why I'd applied without telling them. I said I didn't want to get anyone's hopes up. My father asked how I planned to pay for the rest of it, the 20% the scholarship didn't cover. I told him I'd been saving and I planned to work on campus. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. He said, "You think you can handle a university? You've never lasted at anything hard without falling apart." I thought about every grade I'd ever earned, every dollar I'd ever saved, every early morning and skipped lunch and quiet Friday night while other kids went to parties. I said, "I'll manage." My mother said it was far away and asked what happened if things went wrong, and her voice had that particular quality it always got when she was reminding me of my own fragility, like she was genuinely concerned, but the concern was also a leash. I said things wouldn't go wrong. She said, "Nora, honey, you know how you are." That sentence. For words. I have turned them over in my hands 1,000 times since then. You know how you are. Like I was a weather pattern. Like I was a known quantity of disaster. I went back to my room, sat on my floor, and let myself feel the anger fully for about 10 minutes. Then I packed my first box. I left on a Sunday in late August with 2 duffel bags, a backpack and $3,200 in my savings account. My father was still asleep. My mother stood in the kitchen doorway in her robe and watched me carry my bags to the cab I'd called. She didn't help. She didn't hug me. She said in this voice that was almost gentle, "Don't be too proud to call when you need to come home. Because you will." Petra wasn't awake. The cab pulled away and I watched the house disappear in the window and I didn't cry. I told myself I wouldn't cry until I was at least an hour away, and I kept that promise. Somewhere on the highway, passing a rest stop with a Sunoco sign, I let myself cry for about 15 minutes. Then I stopped and didn't cry about them again for 4 years. College was the first place I'd ever existed without an assigned meaning. Nobody knew I was the family omen. Nobody looked at me with that familiar accounting expression. My roommate, a girl named Jess from a small town in Ohio, thought I was quietly intense in a cool way, and invited me to her friend group study sessions like it was nothing. I failed my first chemistry exam. Not badly, but enough that I sat on my dorm bed afterward expecting the familiar crushing feeling that I'd proven something terrible about myself. Jess came in, looked at the grade and said, "Okay, study group Thursday, I'll bring snacks, we've got this." That's it. That was the whole response. No accounting. No sighing. No meaningful look that placed the failed test in a larger story about my fundamental defectiveness. I stared at her for probably too long and then said okay. I passed the next exam with an 88. Nobody threw a party. Nobody needed to. It just happened and was fine, and that was somehow revolutionary. I graduated with a 3.7 GPA and a job offer from a mid-sized urban planning firm called Grayline Associates. I called my mother to tell her. She asked if it was full-time and whether it came with health insurance. When I said yes to both, she said, "Well, let's hope it works out." Then she asked when I was planning to visit, in a tone that suggested she'd been waiting patiently for me to come home and be who I used to be. I said I'd be busy getting settled. I would call her. I didn't call for 3 months. The job was hard and good. My manager, a sharp woman named Dominique, pushed me in ways that felt completely unlike the pushing I'd experienced at home. This pushing was productive. It assumed I was capable of growing. When I made an error in a presentation, she pulled me aside afterward and said, "Here's what went wrong and here's how we fix it. Not, here's proof that you don't belong here." I moved into a one-bedroom apartment 20 minutes from the office. I adopted a black cat named Soot because I thought it was funny, given my history with being called a bad omen. Soot was deeply uninterested in being symbolic. He just slept on my laptop and knocked things off shelves. My mother called on my birthday every year. Same conversation every time. She'd ask how things were going in a voice that expected struggle. I'd tell her things were good. She'd say really in a tone that meant she was reserving judgment. She'd mention Petra's life updates without asking if I wanted to hear them. She'd end with "take care of yourself," in a way that sounded like "don't embarrass us." I always said goodbye warmly, and then sat with the phone in my hand for a while afterward. By year 3 at Grayline, I was managing 2 junior planners and leading a neighborhood revitalization project in the city's East District. By year 4, I had savings that genuinely surprised me. By year 5, I bought a condo. My parents didn't know about any of it. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was in the middle of reviewing permit applications when my phone buzzed with a number I'd stored as, "Dad, don't answer while working." I'd added that note 3 years earlier after he'd called once to ask if I knew Petra's new address. That was the full extent of our contact. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again immediately. I stepped into the hallway and answered. He didn't say hello. He said, "Petra's in the hospital. Appendix. They're talking surgery and possible complications and we need $12,000 by Friday, or they start making different decisions about her care." I said, "Is she okay?" He said, "That depends on the money." Then he told me that since I apparently had a good situation up there, I should understand what family means and act accordingly. He said it the way people say things they've been rehearsing. Calm, certain, with an expectation of compliance built into every syllable. I asked what the hospital had said exactly. He said that wasn't the point. I said I thought it was very much the point. He got quiet in a way that felt threatening, then said, "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Nora. This is your sister." As if I'd forgotten I had a sister. As if 6 years of distance had somehow made me forget the person who called me Raven for a decade. I told him I needed to make some calls and I'd be in touch. He started saying something else, but I ended the call. I went back to my desk, sat down, and stared at my screen for a long time. Then I did what I'd learned to do in moments like this. I texted my therapist, Dr. Mallory, and asked if she had an emergency slot. She did. Dr. Mallory's office had a plant I'd watched grow for 3 years. I sat in the familiar chair across from her, and told her about the call word for word. She listened the way she always did, without filling silence, without nodding too eagerly, just present. When I finished, she asked what I was feeling. I said I was feeling like I was 17 again, standing in a kitchen doorway being looked at like a problem to be managed. She asked what else. I said I was angry. And under the angry I was sad. And under the sad, there was this horrible persistent guilt that I recognized as the voice my family had installed in me over 20 years. The voice that said, "They need you, and if you don't help, you're exactly who they always said you were. Selfish, cursed, fundamentally defective." Dr. Mallory asked me a question that I've thought about almost every day since. She said, "If a stranger called you and said give me $12,000 by Friday, what would you do?" I said I'd hang up. She said, "What makes this different?" I said, "Petra actually exists." She said, "Yes. And what do you know about Petra's situation that's actually verified?" The answer was, almost nothing. I had my father's word, which had never been particularly reliable, about a medical situation I hadn't independently confirmed, involving money with a Friday deadline, delivered without a hello or an acknowledgement that 6 years had passed since we'd spoken. Dr. Mallory didn't tell me what to do. She asked me to write down what I actually knew versus what I was being asked to assume. And she asked me to think about what helping Petra directly, not my parents, might look like. I drove home and sat at my kitchen table until midnight making a list. I called the hospital directly the next morning. This took 3 phone calls and 20 minutes of hold music, But eventually a patient advocate named Sandra confirmed that yes, a Petrovas had been admitted and yes, a procedure had been recommended. Sandra couldn't discuss costs or insurance, but she could transfer me to financial services. I spent 40 minutes on the phone with the financial services department and learned that the hospital had a hardship assistance program, that payment plans existed, that $12,000 by Friday was not actually how hospitals operate for an appendectomy, even with complications, that there were options my parents either didn't know about or hadn't looked for. I also learned that Petra had been listed with an insurance policy, though apparently it had lapsed. I wrote all of this down. Then I drafted a message to my father. I told him I'd spoken to the hospital directly and learned about assistance programs available to Petra. I offered to help Petra apply for hardship assistance. I offered to contribute directly to a verified payment plan through the hospital billing department. I was not willing to transfer money to their personal account. He called me within 20 minutes. He was not calm this time. He said I was treating them like criminals. He said this was what happened when children grew up and forgot where they came from. He said, "Your mother and I sacrificed everything for you," in the exact tone and phrasing parents use when they mean the opposite of what they're saying. I waited until he was finished. Then I said, "I'm offering real help for Petra. I'm not giving money to be managed by people who've never mentioned my name without blaming me for something. That's the offer." He hung up. I sat with the silence and realized my hands weren't even shaking. That felt important. My mother called 2 hours later. She was better at this than my father. Sharper. She knew which levers to pull and how hard. She started with disappointment, which had always worked better on me than anger. She said she didn't know what she'd done to deserve a daughter who treated her family like strangers. She said she'd spent 30 years building a home for us. She said Petra was scared and in pain and the least I could do was show up. I asked when she had last called me. Not to be mean. Genuinely. She said that wasn't the point. I said I thought it sort of was. Then she shifted. She went through a list of my childhood failures the way someone reads from a ledger. The year I got a C in history. The time I didn't show up to Petra's dance recital, which I missed because I had food poisoning and had called to explain. The attitude I'd apparently always had. The way I'd never truly been part of the family. I recognized the move. Dr. Mallory and I had talked about it specifically. It's a destabilization tactic, not a conversation. The goal isn't to resolve anything. The goal is to make me feel small enough that I stop holding a position. I let her finish. Then I said, "Mom, I called the hospital. I know what the options are. I'm offering to help Petra access them. If you want my help, this is what it looks like. If you want a check with no accountability, I'm not the right person." She said, "You've always thought you were better than us." I said, "I've always just wanted to be treated like I existed." The line went quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Don't call here again trying to manage us," and hung up. I went for a walk around my block 3 times. When I got back, I sat on my kitchen floor and let Sit the cat climb into my lap. I didn't cry. I just breathed. I found Petra's email address through an old account I still had access to, and sent her a message directly. I kept it simple. I said I'd spoken to the hospital financial team, and there were options she might not know about. I listed them with links. I said I was willing to help her navigate any of them. I said I hoped she was okay. I sent it and didn't check my email for 6 hours. When I finally looked, there was a response. Petra wrote back 14 words. "I didn't know you were going to be involved. Dad called you." I wrote back, "Yes. Are you okay?" She wrote, "Getting there. This is weird." I wrote, "Yes." We went back and forth for 20 minutes in this careful, stilted way, like two people trying to cross a rope bridge and not sure how much weight it can hold. Petra told me what had actually happened medically, which was less dramatic than my father had presented. She was going to be fine. The surgery had gone well. The financial situation was stressful, but not the emergency my father had described. She didn't apologize for the Raven thing. I didn't bring it up. We weren't there yet, and maybe we'd never get there, and right now what mattered was that she was going to be okay. At the end of the exchange, she said, "I always thought you leaving was dramatic. I understand it a little better now." I read that 3 times. I wrote back, "Thank you for saying that." She said, "Don't make it weird." I almost laughed. Almost. Dr. Mallory asked me at our next session what I'd learned about myself through all of this. I thought for a long time before answering. I said, "I learned that I've been waiting for permission. For 26 years I've been waiting for my family to decide I wasn't the problem, like their verdict would finally let me stop holding my breath. I built a whole career and bought a condo and got good at my job and made real friends, and somewhere underneath all of it I was still waiting for a phone call where my mother said, Actually, Nora, we were wrong about you. Dr. Mallory asked if I still thought that call was coming. I said no. Not because they were evil, but because they built their whole story of themselves on the foundation of me being the flaw in their design. Changing that story would mean looking at every choice they'd made, and I didn't think they were capable of it. People rarely are. She asked what I wanted to do with that information. I said I wanted to stop organizing my life around a verdict that was never coming. She nodded and said that was the work. Not dramatic, not a single breakthrough moment. Just the daily decision to stop waiting and start living like the verdict didn't matter. I also told her about Petra, the 14 words and the rope bridge conversation. Dr. Mallory said that was worth something, even if it was small. She said sometimes one person in a family system manages to look up and see the architecture clearly, and that changes things. Not everything, but things. I bought myself dinner that night at a restaurant I'd been meaning to try for months. I sat alone at a table for two, and ordered the expensive pasta and didn't think about whether I deserved it. I did not get struck by lightning. My luck did not run out. I just ate good pasta and watched people live their lives through the window and felt, for the first time in a very long while, like I was fully on my own side. It's been 7 months since my father's call. My parents have not contacted me again. I sent one letter, short and clear, explaining that I was open to a relationship that was honest and mutual, but I was done being a placeholder for their explanations of why things went wrong. I told them where to find me if they ever wanted to try that version. No response. Which is an answer. Petra and I text occasionally. Nothing deep. She sent me a photo of her apartment last month. A new place she moved into after getting out of our parents' house. I sent back a thumbs up and then thought better of it and sent a real response. It looks like a place where someone has her own life. Good. She sent back a single word. Finally. I'm still at Gray Line. I got promoted 2 months ago to Senior Planning Director. Dominique took me to lunch and said she'd never had a junior staff member who worked with such focused intensity, like someone who had something to prove. I told her I probably did for a long time. She asked if I still did. I thought about it honestly. I said, less now. Now I mostly just like the work. Soot the cat is still deeply unbothered by everything. He knocked my coffee off the counter this morning and looked me dead in the eye while doing it. I told him he was the most catastrophic creature I'd ever met and scratched his ears, and he purred so loudly it sounded like a small engine. Here's what I know now that I didn't know at 17 standing in a kitchen doorway. The story they told about me was never actually about me. It was about them. Their shame and their choices and their need to put the weight of their disappointment somewhere outside themselves. I was convenient. I was small. I was there. But I'm not the curse they needed me to be. I was never the storm cloud. I was just a kid who deserved better and eventually went and found it on her own. If you're reading this and you recognize something in what I've described, I want to tell you what nobody told me.